The maintenance shed sat at the far edge of Camp Phoenix, where the desert wind carried sand through every crack and crevice. Most soldiers avoided this place during the afternoon heat, but Elena Rodriguez preferred the solitude. She sat cross-legged on a worn wooden crate, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, completely absorbed in her work. The CheyTac M200 lay disassembled before her on a clean canvas tarp. Each component gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as she methodically cleaned and oiled every part. Her movements were precise and practiced. Like a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation, the rifle was not assigned to her unit, but Elena had special permission to maintain the long-range weapons. Few people understood these machines like she did. Elena had grown up in rural Montana, where her grandfather taught her to shoot before she could properly hold a baseball bat. Old Miguel Rodriguez had been a sniper in Vietnam, and he passed down more than just marksmanship skills to his granddaughter. He taught her patience, discipline, and respect for the weapon. Every rifle had a personality, he would say, and you had to listen to what it was telling you. The shed door creaked open, letting in a blast of hot air and bright sunlight. Elena didn't look up from her work. She was applying oil to the bolt assembly with a small brush, each stroke deliberate and careful. Footsteps approached across the concrete floor, military boots clicking in a measured pace. Captain James Morrison had been looking for Sergeant Rodriguez for the better part of an hour. He needed to discuss the upcoming training exercise with the newest batch of recruits. What he found instead made him pause in the doorway. The young woman was completely focused on her task, handling the precision rifle with an intimacy that spoke of deep knowledge and experience. Morrison was not new to the military. He had served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Syria before being assigned to this training base in Nevada. He had seen plenty of soldiers clean weapons, but something about Rodriguez's technique caught his attention. She moved with the confidence of someone who truly understood the mechanical poetry of a precision instrument. He watched as she reassembled the trigger mechanism, her fingers working without hesitation. The CheyTac M200 was not a standard infantry weapon. It was a specialized tool designed for extreme long-range engagement, capable of accurate shots beyond 2 miles in the right hands. Most soldiers never even saw one up close, let alone knew how to properly maintain one. Elena finally looked up when she sensed someone watching her. Captain Morrison stood about 10 feet away, his arms crossed, studying her work with professional interest. She quickly came to attention, but he waved her back to her task. "At ease, Sergeant. Don't let me interrupt your work." Morrison stepped closer, genuinely curious. "That's some impressive weapon handling. Where did you learn to work on the CheyTac system?" Elena returned to her cleaning, though she could feel the captain's eyes on her. "My grandfather taught me the basics, sir. The rest I picked up through manuals and practice. Each rifle system has its own quirks, but the principles are mostly the same." Morrison nodded, though he suspected there was more to the story. The CheyTac M200 was not something you learned about from manuals alone. The weapon cost more than most people's cars and required extensive specialized training to operate effectively. Yet here was a sergeant from a logistics unit handling it like she had been born to the task. "Your grandfather sounds like he knew his business," Morrison said, pulling up another crate to sit on. "What branch did he serve in?" "Army, sir. Vietnam era. He was assigned to a long-range reconnaissance unit." Elena's voice carried a note of pride mixed with something else, perhaps sadness. "He passed away 3 years ago, just before I enlisted." The captain watched as she began reassembling the rifle. Her movements were smooth and confident, each component sliding into place with mechanical precision. There was no hesitation, no checking of reference materials. She knew this weapon system intimately. Morrison found himself thinking about his own reasons for joining the military. Like many officers, he had come from a military family, but his path had been more traditional. College, officer training, steady progression through the ranks. Rodriguez's story seemed different, more personal somehow. "What made you choose logistics?" he asked. "With skills like that, you could have gone into specialized roles." Elena paused in her work, a slight frown crossing her face. It was a question she had been asked before, and the answer was complicated. "I wanted to serve, sir, but I also wanted to stay alive. Logistics seemed safer than some alternatives." The honesty in her response surprised Morrison. Most soldiers gave practiced answers about wanting to support the mission or serve their country. Rodriguez's pragmatic assessment was refreshing, even if it suggested she might be underutilizing her talents. As Elena continued her work, Morrison noticed a small notebook lying beside the cleaning supplies. The cover was worn and marked with what looked like range calculations and weather data. He gestured toward it with curiosity. "Mind if I ask what you keep track of in there?" Elena glanced at the notebook, then back to her work. "Just some notes, sir. Ballistic data, environmental factors that affect accuracy. I like to study the mathematics behind long-range shooting. It's interesting how many variables come into play." Morrison reached for the notebook, and Elena tensed slightly but didn't object. As he flipped through the pages, his expression changed from casual interest to focused attention. The notebook was filled with detailed calculations, range cards, wind speed corrections, and atmospheric pressure adjustments. This was not the casual hobby of someone with a passing interest in marksmanship. One entry in particular caught his eye. At the top of a page, written in Elena's neat handwriting, were the numbers 3,150 meters, followed by detailed environmental data and trajectory calculations. Morrison looked up from the notebook to find Elena watching him carefully, her work on the rifle temporarily forgotten. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he said slowly, "I think we need to have a more detailed conversation about your background and qualifications." Captain Morrison closed the notebook and set it down carefully, his mind racing with questions. The calculations he had seen were not theoretical exercises or academic curiosities. They were practical, detailed range cards that suggested real-world experience with extreme long-range shooting. The 3,150-meter notation especially intrigued him, as that distance represented nearly 2 miles of accurate rifle fire. Elena finished reassembling the CheyTac and set it aside, giving Morrison her full attention. She could see the wheels turning in his mind and knew that her carefully maintained low profile was about to change. For 3 years, she had been content to work in logistics, maintaining equipment and avoiding attention. That comfortable anonymity was clearly coming to an end. "Sir, if you're wondering about my qualifications, they're all documented in my personnel file," Elena said, though she suspected the captain had not yet taken the time to review her complete military record. Most officers only glanced at the summary pages, which listed her current assignment and basic training credentials. Morrison stood up and walked to the small window that looked out over the training ranges. In the distance, he could see new recruits struggling with basic marksmanship at the 200-meter line, their shots scattered across the targets with the random pattern of inexperience. He had been tasked with improving the overall shooting standards of the unit, but progress had been frustratingly slow. "Rodriguez, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been looking for ways to improve our marksmanship training program. We have soldiers who can barely hit targets at 300 meters, and you're sitting in a maintenance shed with range cards for shots at over 3 kilometers. He turned back to face her. "That seems like a waste of resources." Elena had expected this conversation eventually. Her grandfather had warned her that exceptional skills were hard to hide in the military, especially in peacetime when commanders were always looking for advantages in training and readiness. She had hoped to serve her enlistment quietly and return to civilian life, but Captain Morrison's interest suggested other plans. "Sir, with respect, I enlisted for logistics support. I maintain weapons and equipment. That's what I'm good at, and it's what the unit needs." Elena's voice remained steady, but Morrison could detect a note of resistance. She was clearly not enthusiastic about changing her role. Morrison pulled Elena's personnel file from his briefcase. He had requested it after seeing her work with the CheyTac, and the contents had surprised him. Elena Rodriguez was not just another logistics specialist. Her record showed completion of advanced marksmanship schools, specialized training in precision rifle systems, and instructor certifications that most career soldiers never achieved. According to this file, you qualified expert marksman with 7 different weapon systems, completed the advanced sniper course at Fort Benning, and hold instructor ratings for long-range precision shooting. Morrison looked up from the papers. You also have competition shooting awards from before your enlistment. National-level awards. Elena's jaw tightened slightly. Those awards belonged to a different time in her life, when she had traveled across the country competing in precision rifle matches. She had been one of the youngest competitors to ever win the national championship, shooting against former military snipers and law enforcement marksmen with decades of experience. "That was before I enlisted, sir," Competition shooting is different from military service. Elena's response was diplomatic but firm. She clearly did not want to discuss her competitive shooting career. Morrison continued reading from her file. It says here you hold the unofficial record for longest confirmed hit during training exercises. The notation shows 3,150 meters using a CheyTac M200 system. He looked up with genuine curiosity. That's nearly 2 miles, Sergeant. That's not a lucky shot or a training accident. That's world-class marksmanship. The record Morrison mentioned had been set during Elena's advanced training, almost by accident. The instructors had been conducting an experimental exercise to test the limits of their equipment and ammunition. Most students were struggling to hit targets at 2,500 meters, but Elena's shots consistently found their mark at extreme distances. When they extended the range to over 3,000 meters, she made 3 consecutive hits that left the instructors speechless. It was just training, sir. Laboratory conditions with perfect weather and unlimited time to calculate the shot. Elena's modesty was genuine, but Morrison could see through the downplaying. Making any shot at that distance required extraordinary skill, regardless of conditions. Morrison closed the file and leaned forward. Rodriguez, I'm going to ask you directly. Why are you hiding in logistics when you have these capabilities? The military spent considerable resources training you in specialized skills that you're not using. The question hung in the air between them. Elena looked down at her hands, which still smelled of gun oil and cleaning solvent. She had known this moment would come eventually, but she had hoped to avoid it for a few more years. The truth was complicated and personal, involving family expectations, personal fears, and a desire for a normal life that seemed incompatible with her unusual talents. Sir, after my grandfather died, I promised my grandmother I would serve my country but stay safe. She already lost one family member to war, and she couldn't handle losing another. Elena's voice carried the weight of family obligation and personal conflict. Logistics seemed like the best way to honor both commitments. Morrison understood family pressure and the complexity of military service. His own family had mixed feelings about his career choices, balancing pride in his service with concern for his safety. But Elena's situation seemed different, more like a talented musician forced to work in an office instead of performing. I respect your family commitments, Sergeant, but I have a responsibility to this unit and these soldiers. We have young men and women who need better training if they're going to survive in combat situations. Morrison's voice took on a more serious tone. I think you could help them in ways that have nothing to do with combat deployment. Elena looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since the conversation had turned serious. She could see that Captain Morrison was not just making casual conversation. He had a specific proposal in mind, and her comfortable routine was about to change whether she wanted it to or not. What exactly are you asking me to do, sir? Captain Morrison walked back to the window, organizing his thoughts before making his proposal. He had been struggling with the marksmanship problems in his unit for months, watching good soldiers fail to meet basic shooting standards despite extensive training time and ammunition expenditure. The solution had been sitting in his logistics section all along, quietly maintaining weapons while possessing world-class shooting skills. I want you to take over our advanced marksmanship training program, Morrison said, turning back to face Elena. Not as a sniper or combat specialist, but as an instructor. You would stay on base, work with soldiers who show potential for long-range shooting, and help improve our overall shooting standards. Elena felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The proposal kept her away from direct combat roles while utilizing her skills in a meaningful way. However, she also knew that accepting would mean giving up her quiet anonymity and taking on responsibilities that could affect other soldiers' lives and careers. Sir, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for that role. Teaching requires different skills than shooting. Elena's hesitation was genuine. While she was confident in her own abilities, translating that knowledge to other people presented different challenges. Morrison had anticipated this objection. Rodriguez, according to your file, you've already been doing informal instruction. Several soldiers have requested you for weapons maintenance specifically because you help them understand their equipment better. That's teaching, whether you call it that or not. Elena realized he was right. Over the past 2 years, she had found herself explaining not just how to clean weapons, but how to improve accuracy, adjust for environmental conditions, and develop consistent shooting techniques. Soldiers sought her out for advice because, Word had spread that the quiet sergeant in logistics knew more about shooting than most of the official instructors. The position would come with a promotion to staff, sergeant and assignment to the training command. Morrison continued. You would have your own range facility, access to specialized equipment, and the authority to develop curriculum based on your experience and knowledge. The offer was tempting, but Elena had concerns beyond her grandmother's worries about safety. She had seen how the military could consume people who showed exceptional abilities, pushing them toward increasingly demanding and dangerous assignments. Her grandfather had started as a regular infantry soldier, but ended up in special operations because someone noticed his shooting skills. Captain, I need to ask about the long-term expectations. If I take this position and prove successful, what happens next? Am I going to find myself assigned to combat units or special operations? Elena's question revealed her primary concern about accepting increased responsibility. Morrison understood her worry and had given this considerable thought. This position is specifically designed for training command. The goal is to improve overall unit readiness, not to identify candidates for special operations. You would be developing basic soldiers into competent marksmen, not training elite warriors. Elena weighed the proposal carefully. The work would be meaningful and would utilize her skills without requiring deployment to dangerous locations. She could fulfill her military obligation while honoring her promise to her grandmother. Most importantly, she could help other soldiers develop skills that might save their lives in future conflicts. What would the training program involve exactly? Elena asked, showing her first real interest in the proposal. Morrison pulled out a folder containing his preliminary plans for the expanded marksmanship program. Currently, we conduct basic rifle training at 200 and 300 meters. Most soldiers qualify but never develop real proficiency. I want to establish an advanced program that takes promising shooters and develops them into precision marksmen. Elena reviewed the proposed curriculum, noting areas where her experience could make significant improvements. The current program focused on mechanical techniques but ignored many of the mental and environmental factors that affected accuracy at longer ranges. This is a good foundation, but it's missing some critical elements, Elena said, her instructor instincts beginning to engage. Long-range shooting is as much about reading conditions and understanding ballistics as it is about trigger control and sight alignment. Morrison smiled, seeing Elena's professional interest overriding her personal reluctance. That's exactly why I need someone with your background. The current instructors are competent at basic levels, but they don't have the advanced knowledge to take soldiers to the next level. Elena set down the curriculum folder and looked directly at Morrison. Sir, if I accept this position, I want to do it right. That means having the authority to completely redesign the program, access to proper equipment, and the ability to select students based on potential rather than rank or connections. Agreed, Morrison replied immediately. You would have full authority over curriculum development and student selection. The only requirement is that you document your methods so the program can continue if you're reassigned. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching the maintenance shed. Through the window, Elena could see a convoy of new recruits arriving for their first day of weapons training. The young soldiers looked nervous and uncertain as they climbed out of the trucks, most of them probably having never fired a rifle before enlisting. Elena watched the new arrivals with professional assessment, automatically evaluating their posture, confidence levels, and physical attributes that might affect their shooting potential. It was an unconscious habit developed during her competitive shooting days, when she had mentored younger competitors at national matches. When would you want me to start? Elena asked, surprising herself with the question. She had not intended to accept the position so quickly, but seeing the new recruits had activated her instructor instincts. Morrison recognized the shift in her demeanor and pressed his advantage. As soon as possible. We have a new training cycle starting next week, and it would be ideal to begin with fresh students rather than trying to retrain soldiers who have already developed bad habits. Elena thought about her grandmother's concerns and her own desire for a quiet military career, but she also thought about her grandfather's teachings and the responsibility that came with exceptional skills. Miguel Rodriguez had always told her that abilities were gifts that carried obligations to help others. All right, Captain, I'll take the position, Elena said, extending her hand to seal the agreement. But I want it understood that this is about training soldiers to be better marksmen, not about preparing them for special operations or combat deployments. Morrison shook her hand firmly. Understood completely. Your job will be to turn average shooters into good shooters, and good shooters into excellent marksmen. Nothing more complicated than that. As they concluded their agreement, Elena felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension about her new role. She would be leaving the comfortable anonymity of logistics for a position that would put her skills on display for evaluation and criticism. However, she also sensed an opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to military readiness while honoring her family obligations and personal values. 2 weeks later, Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez stood at the edge of Range Complex Charlie, watching her first class of advanced marksmanship students arrive for their initial assessment. The range had been upgraded specifically for her program, with targets extending out to 800 meters and specialized equipment for teaching long-range precision techniques. The morning air was crisp and still, perfect conditions for accurate shooting. 12 soldiers had been selected for the pilot program based on their basic marksmanship scores and recommendations from unit commanders. They represented a mix of military occupational specialties from infantry to military police to combat engineers. What they shared was demonstrated potential for improved marksmanship and willingness to commit to the demanding training schedule Elena had designed. Elena had spent the past 2 weeks completely restructuring the advanced marksmanship curriculum. Instead of focusing solely on shooting techniques, her program emphasized the complete skill set required for precision rifle work. Students would learn meteorology, ballistic mathematics, equipment selection, and the mental discipline required for consistent accuracy under pressure. Private First Class Marcus Johnson was the first to arrive, carrying his assigned M24 rifle system with obvious care and respect. He had been recommended by his squad leader after consistently achieving the highest scores in basic rifle training. Johnson came from a hunting family in rural Wisconsin and had grown up shooting, but military precision work was entirely different from deer hunting. "Good morning, Staff Sergeant," Johnson said, setting his equipment down at the designated staging area. "I'm really looking forward to this program. I've heard you're supposed to be some kind of shooting wizard." Elena smiled at the comment while internally noting that her reputation had apparently grown during the transition between positions. Word traveled fast in military units and stories tended to become exaggerated through retelling. She preferred to let her instruction speak for itself rather than rely on rumors and speculation. "We'll see about that, Johnson. Today is assessment day. I need to understand each student's current capabilities before we begin actual instruction." Elena gestured toward the 300-meter targets that had been set up for initial evaluation. "We'll start with some basic shooting to establish a baseline." The remaining students arrived over the next few minutes, each carrying their assigned precision rifle and basic equipment. Elena had specifically requested older, more mature soldiers for the pilot program, believing that patience and discipline were more important than natural athletic ability for precision shooting. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos had been recommended by her military police unit commander after demonstrating exceptional accuracy during qualification training. She was a single mother from Texas who had joined the military after her husband's death, seeking stable employment and educational opportunities for her children. Santos approached shooting with methodical seriousness that Elena immediately appreciated. "Staff Sergeant, I want to thank you for accepting me into this program," Santos said as she organized her equipment. "I know my background isn't traditional for advanced marksmanship training." Elena understood the comment. Women were still underrepresented in precision shooting roles, despite having no physical disadvantages for the discipline. Some of the best competitive shooters she had encountered were women, who often excelled at the mental aspects of long-range shooting that many men found challenging. "Santos, marksmanship is about precision, patience, and attention to detail. Gender has nothing to do with it," Elena replied. "I'm more interested in your ability to learn and apply complex information under pressure." As the students completed their preparation, Elena noticed Captain Morrison approaching from the range control building. He had been supportive throughout the program development phase, providing resources and administrative backing while allowing her complete freedom in curriculum design. His presence today indicated his continued investment in the program's success. "How are your students looking, Staff Sergeant?" Morrison asked, observing the 12 soldiers as they checked their equipment and reviewed the safety briefing materials Elena had prepared. Too early to tell, sir. Today is just initial assessment to see what we're working with. Elena watched Private Johnson attempting to adjust his rifle scope, noting both his confidence and his technique errors. Some have obviously shot before, others are starting from basic military training. That's actually good for program development. Morrison nodded, understanding that Elena needed students with varying skill levels to test her teaching methods. If the program could successfully improve both beginners and experienced shooters, it would prove the curriculum's effectiveness across a broad range of abilities. Elena called her students to attention and began the formal introduction to the Advanced Marksmanship program. She had prepared remarks that explained the program's goals while setting appropriate expectations for the demanding training ahead. This program will teach you to make accurate shots at distances most soldiers never attempt, Elena began. But precision shooting is not about showing off or setting records. It's about developing skills that can save lives and complete missions when accuracy matters most. She gestured toward the distant targets that marked the extent of the range complex. We'll start with shots at 300 meters and gradually extend to 800 meters by the end of the program. Some of you may eventually qualify for shots beyond 1,000 meters, but that depends on your individual development and unit requirements. Elena intentionally avoided mentioning her own capabilities at extreme distances. The program was about developing her students' skills, not demonstrating her own abilities. She had learned from her grandfather that the best instructors focused on their students' success rather than their own achievements. The first thing you need to understand is that precision shooting is primarily mental, Elena continued. Physical technique is important, but your mind controls everything. Weather reading, range estimation, ballistic calculations, and shot timing all require mental discipline and systematic thinking. Sergeant Santos raised her hand with a question. Staff Sergeant, how do we know if we have the mental capacity for this kind of shooting? Is it something you're born with or something you can develop? Elena had expected this question and had a prepared answer based on her competitive shooting experience. Santos' precision shooting ability is mostly developed through practice and proper instruction. Natural talent helps, but dedication and systematic training are much more important. I've seen naturally gifted shooters fail because they wouldn't do the work, and average shooters excel because they committed to the process. The assessment phase of the day involved shooting at multiple distances with careful observation of each student's technique, equipment handling, and mental approach to the challenges. Elena moved among the firing positions, taking notes and providing minimal guidance while allowing each shooter to demonstrate their current capabilities. Private Johnson showed natural shooting ability but lacked discipline in his preparation and shot timing. Sergeant Santos demonstrated excellent attention to detail and systematic approach, but needed work on her physical shooting position. Each student revealed different strengths and weaknesses that would inform Elena's individual instruction plans. By midday, Elena had gathered enough information to begin tailoring the program to her students' specific needs. The assessment had confirmed her belief that successful precision shooting instruction required individual attention rather than one-size-fits-all approaches. 6 weeks into the Advanced Marksmanship program, Elena stood behind Sergeant Santos as she prepared for her first shot at 600 meters. The target seemed impossibly small through the spotting scope, but Santos had consistently progressed through each distance milestone with methodical determination. Her shooting position was textbook perfect, and her breathing pattern showed the calm rhythm that Elena had taught all her students. Remember, Santos, the wind is your biggest challenge at this distance, Elena said quietly, not wanting to disturb the shooter's concentration. You've got a slight crosswind from the left, maybe 3 miles per hour. What's your correction? Santos studied the mirage through her rifle scope, reading the heat waves rising from the ground between her position and the target. Elena had spent weeks teaching her students to interpret environmental signs that most shooters never noticed. Wind speed, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients, and humidity all affected bullet trajectory at extended ranges. I'm seeing approximately half a minute of angle left windage correction based on the mirage pattern, Santos replied, her voice steady and confident. Temperature is 78 degrees, humidity around 40%. My ballistic calculator shows a quarter-minute elevation adjustment from my 500-meter zero. Elena nodded approvingly. Santos had internalized the mathematical relationships between environmental conditions and bullet trajectory that formed the foundation of precision shooting. More importantly, she had developed the confidence to trust her calculations and commit to the shot. The rifle cracked, sending a 175-grain match bullet downrange at 2,600 feet per second. Through the spotting scope, Elena watched the bullet's impact appear in the target's 9-ring, just slightly left of center. An excellent shot for Santos's first attempt at 600 meters, demonstrating both accurate calculation and precise execution. Outstanding shot, Santos. That's a solid hit at a challenging distance. Elena made notes in her instructor logbook while Santos worked the rifle's bolt to prepare for her next shot. Your wind reading was perfect. The slight left impact suggests you may have had a tiny bit of shooter error in your natural point of aim. Captain Morrison had been observing the training session from the range control building, impressed by the progress Elena's students had made in just 6 weeks. When the program began, most of these soldiers could barely hit targets consistently at 300 meters. Now they were engaging successfully at twice that distance with confidence and understanding. Morrison approached the firing line as Elena concluded Santos's shooting session. Staff Sergeant, I've been watching your students' development and the improvement is remarkable. How do you account for such rapid progress? Elena secured Santos's rifle and walked with Morrison toward the equipment staging area. Sir, the key is building understanding rather than just teaching techniques. Most marksmanship instruction focuses on physical skills like sight alignment and trigger control. Those are important, but they're just the beginning. She gestured toward Private Johnson, who was calculating windage corrections for his next shot, using the environmental measurement tools Elena had taught him to use. Johnson understands why his bullets behave differently at various distances and conditions. That knowledge gives him confidence to trust his calculations and focus on execution. Morrison had received preliminary reports from other units requesting access to Elena's training program. Word of the pilot program's success had spread throughout the base, creating demand that exceeded current capacity. He needed to discuss expansion possibilities with Elena, but he also wanted to ensure the quality of instruction wouldn't be compromised by rapid growth. Rodriguez, I've got good news and challenging news, Morrison said as they reached the equipment area. The good news is that your program has been approved for permanent implementation, with funding for expanded facilities and additional instructors. The challenging news is that demand far exceeds what you can handle alone. Elena had expected this development and had mixed feelings about the program's success. On one hand, she was proud that her instruction methods were proving effective and helping soldiers develop valuable skills. On the other hand, expansion would require training additional instructors and potentially diluting the personalized attention that made the program successful. Sir, how many additional students are we talking about? Elena asked, though she suspected the numbers would be significant based on Morrison's expression. Conservatively, we have requests for 40 additional students in the next training cycle, with more expected as word spreads to other installations. Morrison showed Elena the request documents that had accumulated over the past 2 weeks. Higher Headquarters is very interested in replicating this program across multiple training bases. Elena reviewed the requests, noting that they came from units with diverse missions and geographic locations. Some were infantry units preparing for deployment, while others were support units looking to improve their overall readiness levels. The variety of requesting units confirmed that precision marksmanship skills had broad military applications beyond traditional combat roles. Captain, I'm willing to help expand the program, but I have concerns about maintaining quality standards, Elena said. Precision shooting instruction requires detailed individual attention and extensive knowledge of ballistics and environmental factors. Not every qualified marksman can teach these concepts effectively. Morrison had anticipated this objection and had already begun researching potential instructor candidates. What qualifications would you recommend for additional instructors? I want to ensure we select people who can maintain your standards. Elena had given considerable thought to instructor qualifications during the program development phase. They need advanced marksmanship credentials, obviously, but they also need teaching ability and patience for working with developing shooters. Military experience alone isn't sufficient. As they discussed expansion plans, Sergeant Santos approached with questions about her next training milestone. She had successfully qualified at 600 meters and was eager to attempt shots at 700 meters, which would require more sophisticated ballistic calculations and environmental reading skills. Staff Sergeant, I've been working on the atmospheric density calculations you assigned, and I think I understand the relationship between altitude, temperature, and bullet trajectory, Santos said, showing Elena her homework calculations. But I'm still struggling with reading mirage patterns at longer distances. Elena reviewed Santos's mathematical work, noting both the accuracy of her calculations and the systematic approach she had developed. Your math is perfect, Santos. Mirage reading just takes practice and experience. We'll work on that during your 700-meter qualification next week. The interaction reminded Morrison why Elena's program was so effective. She combined technical instruction with individual mentoring that addressed each student's specific learning needs. Replicating that approach across multiple instructors and larger student populations would require careful selection and extensive training of additional staff. Rodriguez, would you be interested in developing an instructor certification program? Morrison asked. We could bring potential instructors here for intensive training under your supervision before they return to establish programs at their home installations. Elena considered the proposal carefully. Training instructors would multiply her impact and help more soldiers develop precision shooting skills. However, it would also require her to spend time away from direct student instruction, which she found most rewarding. I'm willing to develop instructor training, sir, but I want to maintain involvement in direct student instruction as well, Elena replied. Teaching instructors is important, but I also want to keep working with individual students to continue developing my own teaching methods. Morrison agreed immediately, recognizing that Elena's continued involvement in direct instruction would maintain the program's quality and innovation. We'll structure it so you spend part of your time training instructors and part working with students. That way the program continues evolving while expanding to help more soldiers. 1 year later, Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation platform overlooking the expanded range complex Charlie, watching 12 new instructor candidates conduct their final teaching evaluations. The facility had grown from a single 800-meter range to a comprehensive precision marksmanship training center with multiple ranges extending to 200 meters, computer-based ballistic training classrooms, and specialized equipment for environmental measurement and calculation. Elena's promotion to Master Sergeant had come with her appointment as Director of Advanced Marksmanship Training, a position created specifically to oversee the program's expansion across multiple military installations. She now supervised 6 certified instructors and had personally trained 24 additional instructors who operated programs at bases throughout the United States and overseas. The success of the program had exceeded everyone's expectations. Soldiers who completed Elena's advanced marksmanship training showed dramatically improved shooting performance in their operational units, and several had been selected for specialized roles based on their developed skills. More importantly, the program had created a culture of precision and attention to detail that extended beyond marksmanship into other aspects of military performance. Captain Morrison, now Major Morrison, approached the observation platform carrying a folder containing the latest